I'm Leonard Baines, the Dean of the University of Houston Law Center. Welcome to the CLE on Pathway to the Judiciary. I'm delighted for us to host this event tonight. A little bit about me. I am the Dean of this law school. I've been Dean for a little bit over 8 years. The Law Center is a top tier law school with several programs in the top 20, a health law program, intellectual property program, part-time program, and environmental law program. Law Center is a hub of intellectual activity with a very talented faculty. It's had a historic mission to serve the Houston community and provide legal education to students of all backgrounds. Our student body is almost 40% minority, 80% first-generation law school students, almost 20% first-generation college students. And we're the only law school in the nation named as a diversity champion by Insight and Diversity magazine. So we're holding this event because we want to make sure the judiciary is open to everyone, that everyone has as much information about becoming a judge and have the knowledge to become a judge. And the judiciary is open to anyone, no matter what your race, your color, your gender, economic background, political affiliation, or what law school you attended and graduated from. The judiciary is an important part of our democracy. Our judiciary has been independent. It makes us who we are. It's something that a lot of lawyers aspire to. We read cases in our casebook that are about in law school about judges and judges' decisions. We do a lot of that, and we all aspire and sometimes critique, but also admire what our judges do. And we see that the independence of the judiciary has become even more important over the past few years. And we need to make sure for the integrity of our judicial system that the judiciary is as open to all people as to become a judge as possible. And what we've learned, what we've witnessed in the past decade or so, is that it's become a much narrower pool of people who are becoming judges, especially the federal bench. There's a narrower pool of law schools, a narrower pool of careers before going to law school. Many of the judges were former law clerks. You see this, in fact, with the last 4 Supreme Court appointments. They were all law clerks for the Supreme Court. You see that at the Fifth Circuit and many other circuit courts. As a result, the judiciary sometimes has a less broad perspective, a less broad range of experiences and backgrounds, which may affect the judicial decision-making. So we have, a wonderful panel of judges to talk about their path to the judiciary and what people may consider and think about in becoming a judge. What I will do is that, what will happen is each panelist will speak about 10 minutes. I will give a brief bio of the judge before he or she speaks. I'll then ask the judge, after all 4 speak, some questions, and then leave it open to the audience for questions through the question and answer function on the webinar. So many thanks for all you being here. And there's going to be a scintillating conversation. And the first judge I'd like to introduce is Judge Vanessa Gilmore. So Judge Gilmore graduated from Hampton University and the University of Houston Law Center. After law school graduation, she first worked at the Houston firm that later became known as Vickery, Kilbride, Gilmore, and Vickery, where she specialized in civil litigation. Judge Gilmore also served as president of the YWCA and chair of the Texas Department of Commerce. In 1994, Judge Gilmore was sworn in, and at the time, she was the youngest sitting federal judge in the nation. She was also the first graduate of the University of Houston Law Center to be appointed to the federal bench. Let's welcome Judge Vanessa Gilmore.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am so pleased and happy to have this opportunity, Dean Baines, to share with the students today. on the topic of the path to the judiciary. I have been on the bench now for 27 and a half years. As a number of people know, I have already announced my retirement, and I will actually be retiring January 2 of 2022. So there's an opening for my job, but not here in Houston, as it turns out, because my seat has actually been moved from Houston to Laredo, Texas, which is also in this district. My path to the judiciary is one that came about as a result of public service. And in many ways, I think that that makes sense because committing to become a judge, particularly committing to become a federal judge, which is a lifetime appointment, is an act of public service. I think that my opportunity to have this position came about as a result of people already understanding and knowing my commitment to public service in the community in the Houston area. Dean Baines mentioned that I had once been president of the YWCA of Houston, and the fact that I was out and about in the community being of service is the thing that I think got me noticed. I don't believe that I was the smartest lawyer in town or the one with the most connections, but I was seen as somebody who was committed to this community. And so one of my friends who actually became chief of staff to Governor Ann Richards called me and said, the governor wants to see you and she wants to see you this afternoon. And so I hightailed my way to the airport, flew up to Austin, Texas on the company plane, Southwest Airlines, and went to visit with the governor. And she told me at the time that it was her desire and her intent to open up the boards and commissions of the state of Texas and to have them be more representative and more reflective of what the population of Texas looked like, that it wasn't going to be a good old boys club anymore, that she wanted everybody to have a seat at the table. And so she asked me at that time whether or not I would chair the Texas Department of Commerce. I did not think that I was probably really well suited for that opportunity because it's the agency in Texas that's responsible for business development, tourism development, and job training. And I told her, I said, I'm a trial lawyer. I don't see how I would have a role in an organization or in an agency that's responsible for business development. Business development is sort of the antithesis of what I was doing as a plaintiff's trial lawyer. But what she said was that she'd heard about me and she'd heard about the work that I was doing in the community as president of the YWCA. And the one thing that she said to me that completely caught me off guard was, she said, you can do this job because I already heard you're not the kind of person who would hide your light under a bushel. And I didn't even know what that term meant at the time. It turns out that it comes from the Sermon on the Mount, and it means somebody who doesn't hide their talent and abilities. And I thought, certainly I thought I fit the bill in that regard. I was not the kind of person who would hide my talent and ability. And apparently, people noticed some of the things that I was doing in the community. Not only was I involved with the YWCA, but I was involved with United Way, the End Hunger Network, and also with Child Advocates and some other arts organizations as well. And I think that when people see that you're willing and able to be of service to your community, it brings you to the attention of people. And so I took on the opportunity to become a member of the board of the Texas Department of Commerce and worked on job training. I worked on business development. I traveled all over the country recruiting businesses to come to Texas to be involved in commerce and business here, to bring their businesses here. Then the NAFTA treaty, the North American Free Trade Agreement, was under consideration at that time. And I ended up becoming president of an organization called Texans for NAFTA. And in that regard, I had traveled back and forth to Mexico, working with the president of Mexico and other diplomats to increase US trade opportunities. I traveled quite a bit with a gentleman by the name of Bob Kruger, who at the time was chair of the Railroad Commission of Texas. And the Railroad Commission is sort of a misnomer because it's actually responsible for oil and gas and trucking and rail and all kinds of transportation in the state of Texas. And he and I traveled together quite a lot, recruiting businesses to come to Texas. When Bill Clinton became president in 1992 and in 1993 took our then US Senator Lloyd Benson to become Secretary of the Treasury, that left an opening in the US Senate here in Texas. And Governor Richards got to make that appointment. And she appointed Bob Kruger, who had been the chair of the Railroad Commission. And so at the time, I went to then Senator Kruger and said, Senator Kruger, I know you have about 10 openings that you have to make on the federal courts. I would like to be on your committee to help you choose the federal judges in Texas. And he said, yeah, you can do that. And so I thought that I wanted to be not the king. I really wanted to be the kingmaker. I wish I could say that it was my desire and my intent to become a federal judge, but it actually was not my desire or my intent at that time. And so I went to the very first meeting of the persons who were then going to select the federal judges in Texas, and they asked me to resign. They said, oh no, we don't want you. You're not going to be on this committee. And I will tell you honestly, I broke down in tears because I thought I had offended somebody. And I said, did I do something wrong? And they said, no, we're going to put your name up to be a federal judge. I wasn't really particularly interested. And I told them at the time, I didn't think that that was my path. And I called my pastor, Reverend Lawson from Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church, which is right around the corner from U of H. I said, Reverend Lawson, something's happened. He said, what? I said, they asked me to be a federal judge. And he said, ask yourself 2 questions. Will it be good for the community? And do you think you can do the job? I said, well, I can do the job. And he said, I think it will be good for the community to have somebody like you sitting there. This is your job. Call me back when you have a real problem. But then I still wasn't completely convinced. So I called the governor, Ann Richards, who was a mentor to me. And I said, Governor, do you think I should go to the federal bench? And she said, no, don't do it. It's a terrible idea. I got plans for you. I was like, what's the plan? And she said, you're going to run for the Railroad Commission. And I said, oh, okay. So I called my mother, my best mentor, and said, Mom, am I supposed to run for the Railroad Commission? She said, I never heard you say you wanted to run for statewide office. She said, every once in a while you get on the fast train and you think you can pull the bell and get off anytime you want to. And then you realize you're on the fast train to somebody else's destiny. She said, I think it's time for you to pull the bell and get off. And so I pulled the bell and I got off. And of course, the governor went on to run against George W. Bush, got beat badly, and went on to whatever was her destiny, but that was not my destiny. And so I ended up being confirmed to the federal bench in 1994, got sworn in 94. And at my swearing-in ceremony, our chief judge said that everybody who was on the federal bench had something in common, and that was that we all knew a senator. Getting to the federal bench is fraught with a lot more obstacles than some things, because you do have to have relationships. Especially you have to have relationships with US senators, which are not that easy to come by necessarily. But I had been very active politically. I had represented the Democratic Party in Houston in all the election contest cases that came up. And so I knew a lot of people, and a lot of people knew me, and I had a reputation as a result of that. And so I would say that my path is primarily one that reflects an interest in public service, a desire to be of service in the community, and opportunities that were afforded to me because other people noticed my willingness and ability to be involved in trying to be of service to the city of Houston and to the state of Texas. And I think that if you have a heart for service, that certainly is an opportunity and a pathway that could end up resulting in your having the opportunity to go to the judiciary, whether it's to the state judiciary or the federal judiciary. But that is something that I think will stand you in good stead no matter what your ultimate career goals are.
Thank you, Judge Gilmore. That was wonderful. Don't hide your light under a bushel. I know a senator. Those are great takeaways. So next, let me introduce our next speaker, which is Judge Jeff Brown. Judge Brown is a U.S. District Court judge on Galveston Island. He served in that role since 2019. He previously served on the Texas Supreme Court and also served on the 14th Court of Appeals and the District Court. He earned his bachelor's degree from the University of Texas, his JD degree magna cum laude from the University of Houston Law Center, where he served on the Houston Law Review. After his law school graduation, he served as a law clerk to Texas Supreme Court Justices Jack Hightower and Greg Abbott, and he became certified in civil trial law and practice with the Houston firm of Baker Botts LLP. Let's welcome Judge Jeff Brown.
Thank you, Dean Baines. and very pleased to be here. And let me tell y'all to begin with, my nose looks worse on Zoom than it does in person. I took a tumble while running, and it looks horrible on Zoom. It doesn't look this bad just in the mirror. But just in case you were wondering if I had some kind of communicable disease or something, I don't. But very pleased to be here and to visit with y'all about my pathway to the bench. And I'll just get right to it. I was lucky enough to go to the University of Houston Law Center and get a good education there, and went off from there to do a clerkship on the Texas Supreme Court, which is something I recommend law students look into. Clerkships either on the state courts of appeals or in the federal courts. And it was while I was hired by Jack Hightower, who was kind of an elder statesman Democrat on the court at the time, and worked for him for a few months, and he retired while I was clerking for him. And Governor Bush at the time appointed a young trial judge from Houston named Greg Abbott to take Judge Hightower's place. And so I had the elder statesman Democrat and then the rising star Republican, who I got to clerk for 5 months for one, 7 months for the other. And that experience on the Texas Supreme Court really changed the course of my life, because it made me realize that I someday wanted to become a judge, because I saw Judge Hightower do it. I saw Judge Abbott do it. I heard Judge Abbott's stories about the trial bench in Houston, and it all sounded very fun and fulfilling. And so when I left the clerkship, I was going to Baker Botts in Houston, and I knew that I had been on, when I was clerking on the Texas Supreme Court, four of the judges who were there, Tom Phillips, Nathan Hecht, John Cornyn, and Craig Enoch, all had become trial judges, state court trial judges at age 32. And so I knew that it was possible to make it that young. While I was at Baker Botts, my friend and mentor, Jane Bland, was appointed to the state court bench by Governor Bush at age 32. And so, the trend was continuing. And I decided that I might try to go for it after I'd put in a few years at Baker Botts. And I decided if I was going to go for it young, I certainly needed to build up the right kind of experience to show that even though I was still a young lawyer, I had the right kind of experience to be a trial court judge. And so I looked at the firm for opportunities to get into the courtroom, to get cases of my own. At the time, and even still today, Baker Botts has one insurance defense docket left that they keep around to provide trials to train their young lawyers on. And I got to go to trial a lot of times on that Texas Farm Bureau insurance defense docket, which I was very fortunate to get to do, because I was able to build up some real courtroom experience very quickly. I also knew that these were political appointments. That I believe that Governor Bush, Governor Perry, Governor Abbott have all done a very good job of looking for judicial candidates, judicial nominees with the right kind of experience. But it's a political act to appoint a judge. And so I wanted to be able to convince the governor's office that I understood that I would have to run for reelection once I got onto the bench, that I knew what that involved, that I was experienced in party politics and would know my way around. And so in addition to seeking out the right kind of experience, I also got involved in politics, just like Judge Gilmore said that she had. And I volunteered for some judicial campaigns. I worked on John Cornyn's campaign for Attorney General, which became key later on down the road, and just was able to show that I knew what being in politics was about, and that I knew what I would have to do to defend the governor's appointment once I had to run for election. And then I also knew that as a young lawyer, I needed to have some visibility, and I needed to have the right kind of visibility, because what happens when these spots come open and the governor's office is considering appointing someone to fill a vacancy is the applicants get vetted and get talked about around the bar, and around among lawyers. And so you need to be, when your name comes up, people need to be able to say, oh, I know who that is. And that happens by doing a lot of the community work that Judge Gilmore described. And you do that community work because it's meaningful to you, but you also do, but it has this added benefit of giving you the kind of visibility that means that people will recognize your name when it comes up. And so I did some cases for Houston volunteer lawyers. I got involved in HYLA. I just tried to get involved around the community and attend bar events in Houston and get to know people, so that once my name came up, if it ever did, folks would know who I was. And when I'd been at Baker Botts, when I'd been out of law school for about 6 years, a vacancy came up on the district court bench in Harris County. I applied for it, filled out the application, got vetted by the governor's office, and I did not get that first one. It was either the second or the third one that I actually got, the 55th, and got vetted by the governor's folks. Got the call and was nominated by the governor and was able to take the bench. And it was a dream come true for me. I was at the 55th then for 6 years. I had to run for election to that court twice. A vacancy came open on the 14th Court of Appeals, and Governor Perry appointed me again to that vacancy after I applied and been vetted. And I probably applied for the Texas Supreme Court, maybe it's my third vacancy that I applied for, third or fourth vacancy that I applied for, that I actually got the nod from Governor Perry for the Texas Supreme Court, which was really a dream come true. I was just the fourth person to clerk at the Texas Supreme Court to then return as a justice on the court, and it was the honor of a lifetime to get to work at that court. What Justice Gilmore described about the federal system it sounded very familiar to me. When I'd been on the Texas Supreme Court for about 6 years, there was a vacancy came up on the Southern District Court bench, and that seat was going to be in Galveston. And the way that works, Judge Gilmore talked about the committee that the senators put together. It's called the Federal Judicial Evaluation Committee, and it's made up of lawyers. I think it's about 30 or 40 lawyers from around the state, bipartisan committee. And they put out the press release to request the applications to fill vacancies, and then they call people in for interviews and vet them. The first step is the long application that you have to fill out for the FJEC, for the senators committee. And if you get past that interview, and that's like 30 lawyers around in a room interviewing you, trying to decide whether you make a good federal judge or not. The next step is to actually go and visit. If you make it to the next step is actually go to Washington and visit with the senators. Right now, that's Senator Cornyn and Senator Cruz. And this all works differently depending on when I went through, there were 2 Republican senators and a Republican president. And that is it can change if the president and the senators are not of the same party. Then it becomes more of a compromise pick between the White House and the senators. But I happen to know Senator Cornyn from when I had clerked at the Supreme Court and worked for him in his AG's race. And Ted Cruz and I had actually clerked together were summer associates together at Baker Botts. So you never know who's going to be a U.S. senator someday. 24-year-old Ted Cruz at Baker Botts ended up being one of the 2 senators who were able to recommend me to the White House for the seat that I now hold here on the Federal District Court bench in Galveston. The step after that is go back to Washington for an interview with White House counsel, and then you have to go through the Senate Judiciary process. But at all of those stages, what I laid out, what I tried to build up for that first appointment, all helped me. The experience that I had tried to develop as a trial lawyer, the visibility around the bar that I got from getting involved, and and showing that I understood how the political system is played. And whether you like it or not, you know, I don't consider judges politicians, but politics is involved in getting to the bench. And so you have to understand that world, and you have to play around in it a little bit. But I'm thrilled to hold the seat I hold now, and feel very lucky that I've been able to hold all the benches that I have, and would love to see some more U of H folks on the bench. We need you badly.
Thank you, Judge Brown. It was illuminating, fascinating. Some of my takeaways: start young, have a vision, go get that, go after that vision. You don't know who you have to treat everybody with respect, because you don't know if that other person in the office next to you as a summer associate is going to be U.S. Senator someday, right? So that's very, very important. And persistence. You said you took 3 times that you applied for the Texas Supreme Court. And so I think those are really great takeaways for the audience, is not to give up, but also keep your eyes on the prize and treat everybody with respect, and certainly, work in the community. Thank you so much. So the next speaker is Magistrate Judge Lane. He's been magistrate since 2004 in the Western District of Texas, which is in Austin. Prior to being appointed to the bench, Judge Lane was with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of Texas. During his tenure there, he served in a variety of positions, including Assistant U.S. Attorney, Chief of the Austin Division, and Counselor to U.S. Attorney. He also spent a year on special detail of the U.S. Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. Judge Lane has his BBA from the University of Texas and his JD from the University of Houston Law Center. And after law school, he clerked for Rusty Duncan III on the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals and served as Assistant District and County Attorney in Travis County. So let's welcome Judge Mark Lane.
Thank you, Dean Baines. I am speaking to you from the courthouse in Austin, Texas, where I am every day amazed that I am fortunate enough to be working. I'll also always be grateful, really forever, to the University of Houston Law Center, because in many ways it gave me a second chance. A chance that I needed because, as Dean Baines alluded to, I went to the University of Texas in undergrad, and I found myself majoring in beer drinking and minoring in fraternity work. And I got A's in those subjects, but maybe not so well in some of the academic pursuits that I should have dedicated myself to. So U of H always represented a second chance for me, and an important chance, and I took it. And when I got done, though, at the University of Houston Law Center in 1987, the Texas economy was on its ear. And what I mean by that is we were in an oil and gas crisis, a looming savings and loan crisis. Jobs were not that plentiful. And frankly, I was at a loss at what I was going to do. And what I'm going to touch on is something that Judges Gilmore and Brown did as well. And it's just how important relationships are to your future. Whether those relationships are forged with folks who are going to be running our great state, or in my case, the legal community here in Austin. My good fortune started with an internship after my first year of law school on the Denton County Courthouse Square, where I went to work for a small firm that included a gentleman by the name of Rusty Duncan. There were 9 lawyers in that firm. He was a criminal defense attorney of some reputation, and he was also a really terrific guy. And we really hit it off. And as I was graduating from law school, I was weighing my various options, and Judge Duncan at the time called me. And the story is he ended up running for the Court of Criminal Appeals and secured a seat just as I was graduating from law school. And he called me and asked me to be his first appointed briefing attorney. And that's kind of the first step in my process, my path, if you will, to the judiciary, is just how critical the people that you meet are to your future. You never know who they are going to be. And it's all the more reason why you need to treat everybody you deal with well and with respect, and search out friendships and cultivate and develop those friendships. Well, anyways, I came up to Austin after graduating from law school, worked with him for a year, and that set me on my course in criminal law. And I have to tell you, when I was at the University of Houston in, first year, second year, nobody wanted to be a criminal defense attorney. Everybody talked about going to big law, and I kind of fell into that mantra and thought that way myself until I got to work with Judge Duncan at the court. And I'll digress for just a moment. I tell every young lawyer I meet that if time and circumstances allow, pursue a clerkship. It is the best vehicle to transition from the world of academia into the real world of working from 8 to 5 and often much more, and being responsible and timely. It's the perfect bridge for that. And it was also the perfect opportunity to meet everybody, frankly, who was somebody in the criminal prosecution and defense world in Austin, Texas in 1987 to 88. As I finished that experience was a segue into the county attorney's office, and then later the district attorney's office in Austin, where I worked for 6.5 years, and then later the U.S. attorney's office. But along each step of the way was dependent upon the previous step. So my theme is to tell you that I think the pathway to the judiciary is a function of really 3 things. First is luck, but you got to make your luck. It's kind of like playing blackjack. There are certain plays you make depending on what the dealer card has and what you've got, and you've got to make the right plays. So you got to make your luck. The other thing you've got to do is you got to have help. And the only way you're going to get help is through the relationships and the people that you have met. And then the last thing is you've got to make yourself unique in some way, special, as my mom would say. You've got to do something that makes you a little different than everybody else. And so with that in mind, the county attorney's office, I was like a pig in slop when I went there, because I've tried a case within 1 week of starting in the office. And that's the way it was for that whole first year I was there. And as a young prosecutor, you're going up against some of the best criminal defense attorneys in town who are representing the pilots and the lawyers and the other professionals who are accused of DWI, for instance. And so I got a swift combat education in courtroom tactics. And you know what I found out is I liked it. It was fun. And I had and really that was the theme, frankly, during my entire career as a prosecutor, maybe until the very end when maybe the bloom was off the rose a little bit, quite frankly. But in the beginning, it was just terrific fun. And my Travis County is a little different. The county attorney had misdemeanor responsibility. The district attorney has felony responsibility. But I did well at the county. I got to the district attorney's office and started there. And I was having terrific fun there. But then my education at the University of Texas, my degree, more importantly, in finance, came back to bite me, because Travis County at the time, the DA got a lot of statewide authority to prosecute. And among those areas of prosecution were insurance fraud. And I still remember when the first assistant called me and said, Mark, I see you've got a finance degree. We need somebody with that kind of background in our beginning or our new unit for insurance fraud. And I really wanted to cry, because that's not the prosecutor I wanted to be. I wanted to be the blood and guts guy that frankly most prosecutors want to be. But I'm also a believer in, there's a Garth Brooks song out there, Unanswered Prayers. Sometimes you think you really want something and something else comes along and it ends up being better. So I said yes, I did it. And that ended up being the reason I got to the U.S. Attorney's Office, because at the U.S. Attorney's Office, frankly, they need some blood and guts prosecutors, but they don't need very many of them. They need fraud prosecutors, particularly in 1995-ish, when I was fortunate enough, again, to have a friend that I knew at the U.S. Attorney's Office call me and say, Mark, they just pulled up the hiring freeze. You need to get your application in ASAP, which I did. And I got the job, and then I prosecuted for 17 years. And I did fraud cases. So, the lesson is, again, it continues to be about relationships. it also is about making the most out of the opportunities that you get. And I still think back to that being put in the insurance fraud unit and how really bummed I was, but how it ended up opening up a whole new world for me, because I ended up being, I'm not trying to toot my horn, but I was reasonably good at it. And I enjoyed it. And I continued to do fraud cases at the U.S. Attorney's Office. We did a lot of course, everything else from drugs and firearms cases and whatnot. But I like doing the fraud. That was kind of my deal. And I'm going to get to my point here in a minute. But the world is small in a federal courthouse in a place like Austin. We had 2 sitting United States district judges, and we had 2 U.S. magistrate judges. Well, as fate would have it, one of the guys I worked with at the U.S. Attorney's Office was another terrific friend and another man that had an important impact on my life, and that's now Judge Robert Pittman, who is a district judge here in Austin now. I worked with him in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and we became friends. He helped me get that 1-year position with the Department of Justice because he had done it the year before I went up there. And that was an opportunity to, again, meet people and have a different experience. But Judge Pittman eventually became a magistrate judge. In fact, he had the position I have now. He left in 2011 to become the United States Attorney. There was a vacancy. And I thought about applying because I felt like I'd prosecuted enough. I wasn't getting the same joy out of the next prosecution as I did maybe back in the beginning. But I wasn't going to apply. And about the last day or two, again, another friend in the probation office suggested, have you applied for that position? And I said, no, I don't have a chance at that job. And she said, yeah, you know what? I know both judges really well because those probation officers talk to the judges back in chambers all the time. And she says, I think you do have a shot. So I said, oh, what the heck? I threw my hat in the ring. And to this day, I don't know how. What little I know is 150 people applied. A nominating committee narrowed it down to 5 people, recommended those 5 names to the district judges, and the district judges plucked my name out of that final 5. I'll tell you candidly, I don't think I was either judge's first choice. But in a 2-judge courthouse, they both have veto authority on the other one. And I was the one they could compromise on and pick. And I think that was a function of all the cases that I tried in front of both judges. In fact, the preceding 6 months, I tried 2 rather big. One was a big gun running case out of Mexico, or the guns going to Mexico. And the other was a $60 million fraud case centered here in Austin. And I tried both of those cases with those judges. And so in many ways, I was a known commodity. I like to think I had a reputation for reasonableness. And so much about being a prosecutor is, are you reasonable? Are you the kind of prosecutor who's twisting the knife? And I wasn't. I didn't take any joy. I still don't take any joy in watching people go off to prison. And I didn't even as a prosecutor, but I had a job to do, and I tried my best to do it. But really, what I want to leave you with is, the pathway to the judiciary depends on the judge you are. I'm a magistrate judge, and just if you don't know what that means, it means I serve on an 8-year term that's renewable, and I've been fortunate enough now to have been renewed, and I'm like year 2 of my 2nd term. Some of my magistrate judges colleagues bristle at this description, but we exist, we magistrate judges, to serve the district judges, quite frankly. We derive all our jurisdiction from them. We derive our job responsibilities, and every courthouse makes different uses of their magistrate judges, and Austin's no different. But what it does mean is the district judges, over time, my sense is they become very dependent upon us to take care of some of the things, quite frankly, they don't want to do all the time because they got bigger fish to fry. And so my pathway is one in which you can see I knew the district judges, and they knew me, and they knew that I would work hard for them. And so that was kind of how I got here. I still don't know what the algebra was when they were picking who their final selection was. but somehow I made it. And I like to think it was a function of all of the really good people that I met over time, who, if I hadn't, whether it's Judge Rusty Duncan or Judge Robert Pittman, is just two of them, I wouldn't be here without them. So that's it.
Thank you, Judge Lane. That was great. And what the takeaways I think of all three are relationships, relationships, relationships. And that, becoming a judge, whether, and we'll hear from the last speaker shortly, but it seems about networking to a large extent. And as you're indicating, make your luck happen for you, and clerking are all really sort of a consistent theme throughout all the presentations so far. So thank you so much, Judge Lane. Let me introduce our next speaker. So our next speaker is Judge Michelle Slaughter on the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. She was elected to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals in 2018. And with more than 4.7 million votes, she received more votes than any other contested candidate in the United States for the 2018 general election. Immediately before joining the Criminal Court of Appeals, Judge Slaughter served 6 years as a district court judge in the 405th District Court of Galveston County. Judge Slaughter earned her JD from University of Houston, cum laude, and in 2004, and her BA magna cum laude from University of Houston in 1998. In law school, she interned for 2 federal district court judges and for the Texas First Court of Appeals. After law school, she worked as a litigation attorney for 2 large international law firms, and then had her own successful law practice until she was elected to the district court. Let's welcome Judge Michelle Slaughter.
Thank you so much, Dean Baines. I really appreciate the introduction, and it is so wonderful to be here with my fellow Cougs. I'm a double Coug, undergrad and law school. I'm very proud of that fact, and take every opportunity to let everyone know I went to University of Houston, because it was an incredible experience for me and really taught me so much and gave me so many opportunities. As Dean Bain mentioned, the internships I had with Judge Lake and Judge Hittner as U.S. District Court judges in the Southern District there in Houston, the First Court of Appeals. I wouldn't have had those sorts of opportunities had I been somewhere other than Houston, because there is such a rich and diverse legal community here that provides all these opportunities. And as Judge Lane mentioned, it is about seizing opportunities. And if you have an opportunity to do an internship, to do a clerkship, please do it. It is worthwhile. Some people worry, well, it's not paid, like for the internships, or the clerkships don't make much money. But the richness of the experience you get, and as the other judges mentioned, the connections you can make are tremendous and worth every bit of it. And then just the experience and the learning and the knowledge that you can get from these internships and clerkships are just tremendous. So I highly, highly recommend that. Now, another thing that struck me that Dean Baines mentioned in his initial introduction was the fact that University of Houston Law Center does draw such a diverse number of candidates for law school. And I would say I was one of those. I was only the second person in my family to go to college. My dad went to college and became a teacher. He was a teacher and a coach, and highly valued education. And also, I came from a multicultural family. My abuelita from Mexico lived with us when I was growing up, and she helped raise me. So I grew up with the Mexican culture, as well as, a Texan culture, Caucasian culture, because my family had a lot of my family members had been in Texas a long time. And so I loved having that diverse culture growing up, and I love seeing it reflected in the University of Houston Law Center and in also the undergrad programs. Now, I was very involved in the law center. That's another way I took advantage of the opportunities. Oh, and by the way, I was the first person in my family to go to law school. I didn't even know any lawyers when I went to law school. But I took advantage of every opportunity I could while at University of Houston Law Center. I was on the moot court team, which gave me great experience standing up before attorneys and judges and presenting arguments and having to think logically and in legal terms. And it was a great way for me to gain courtroom experience in a practice setting. So that's a tremendous opportunity that if you can take advantage of, moot court or mock trial is a great way to make connections and also get some great experience. I was also executive director for the Board of Advocates, and that was fun putting on all the intramural competitions at the law center. And I made some great friends while I was there. And it gave me some great organizational skills by doing that. So that's another great opportunity. And then I was president of the Hispanic Law Students Association. And I especially loved that role because it gave me a chance to do a lot of community outreach. I organized a group to help a school in a minority area and a poverty-ridden minority area to go and teach them how to take an SAT. These high school students had never taken an SAT before, and we were able to put on classes for them to teach them a few tricks on taking the SAT and how to approach it, and just give them the practice because they had never even seen it. And so to let them practice and give them practical tips on taking that and seeing them, come to the realization, I can do this, was really a great experience and one that I really appreciated being able to have on law school. Now, as Dean Baines mentioned, and as I mentioned also, I interned for 2 federal district judges and also First Court of Appeals. Very different types of courts, very different, well, actually 3 different types of courts, because every judge has his or her own unique way of approaching things and doing things. So by having that variety of experience, I really learned a lot about how to think from different perspectives. So if you can get more than one internship or clerkship, that's also a way to really learn a lot and learn about how different judges approach their cases. Now, after graduating from the Law Center, I started off at Haynes and Boone, and I did labor and employment law. And then I was recruited over to Lock Lord, where I also did labor and employment law, but also got pulled into doing complex commercial litigation and bankruptcy work, and really loved all of it. And while I was a young attorney, since I loved my moot court days at University of Houston Law Center so much, I also served as a judge and a coach for the moot court competitions for University of Houston teams. And through that relationship, I got to meet some wonderful attorneys and judges who, again, going back to those relationships, are very valuable in being able to learn from them. And also, when people get to know you, when you build those relationships, people want to help you. So if they're in a position to help you and they like you, they will try to help you. And so much of becoming a judge, whether it's federal judge or even elected, can be that help that you can receive from others who have gone before you. Now, the way I came to the judiciary, because I had a wonderful legal career. I loved working at the firms. I loved our clients. I loved the work. I liked going to trial. I liked doing the appellate work. I liked all of it. But I got involved in the Galveston County Bar Association because I live in Galveston County. So while I was working in downtown Houston, I still lived in Galveston County and decided I wanted to get to know the local community and the local lawyers in Galveston. So I got involved, and I got involved in the Young Lawyers Association, much like what Judge Brown talked about. I got involved in bar functions. So I was on the board of the Young Lawyers, and then I went on to serve as secretary of the Galveston County Bar Association for 2 terms, got to know the lawyers and the judges there in Galveston. And what I learned through that experience, because I didn't practice much in Galveston courts, but what I learned was there were a couple of problematic judges in Galveston, and that the lawyers often complained about. And once I dug into it and learned more about it, I had a problem with some of the ways that they were approaching things too. I was bothered by it. I thought it was wrong, and I knew I could do a better job. And so that's what called me to run is that being bothered by what I was seeing, complaining about it, hearing others complain about it, and say, telling myself, why are you complaining about it? Just do something about it. So I decided I wanted to run against one of these problematic judges. And so I talked to some folks at Lock Board where I was working at the time, told them what I wanted to do, and understood the reality of having to campaign, and explain to them that I did not want to. I knew I couldn't work there and campaign the way I needed to. And so I was going to start my own law practice to give me that flexibility. And the firm was incredibly supportive. They were wonderful about it. And even encouraged me, and even gave me some assistance when I set up my own law practice. And so my law practice actually took off really quickly. So that was a really amazing benefit as well. And I wound up hiring some other attorneys and some staff, and brought in a law partner, and quickly began starting to get involved in the local politics in Galveston County. So I got involved in the Republican Party in Galveston, and built a bunch of relationships there. And after about a year of that involvement, then I announced my candidacy for the 405th District Court in Galveston. And that was where one of who I viewed as a problematic judges sat. And he had been there 12 years. He was a 12-year incumbent. So it was a big job to take on a 12-year incumbent. And I took it to the grassroots. I took my cases directly to the voters. I knocked on thousands of doors. I talked to voters individually, told them why I was a better candidate for judge, why I would do a better job. And so in federal courts, you have to rely on these appointments and these relationships. And in elected office, I got to create my own. Because for those of you who don't know, and I wasn't involved in politics beforehand, I had my own views and such, but I wasn't involved. And so something that many of you may not realize is that really, as a state judge, you have to be elected or appointed, as Judge Brown was initially appointed, but most are elected. And even if you are appointed, you still have to stand for election. So you have to build these relationships with the voters, and you have to typically run with a party, because really you're going to have to run either as a Republican or a Democrat. And not to discourage anyone who wants to be affiliated with a different party or be an independent, it's just the practical nature of it is that it is much harder to get an elected office running as an independent or libertarian or Green Party or the such. So really, Republican or Democrat is kind of where you need to see where you fit if you plan to run. And then it's a matter of getting out to the voters. And I did. I knocked, like I said, I knocked on thousands of doors. I had to send out mailers. I had to, organize a whole campaign, get volunteers, and stand out at the polls during the primary voting, and also during, general election voting and all of that. So it's a lot of work, but also a lot of fun. And it does take time and money and planning. So that is something that if you want to seek elected office, you just need to prepare for. Anyway, but I was able to take my case directly to the voters, and thankfully they decided that I was the best candidate. There were actually 4 of us in the primary when I first ran. And I was about 60 votes short of winning it outright in the primary, but then went on to a runoff election against the incumbent and won there. And that was such a blessing, because I love my time on the district court bench, and I wound up going to a general jurisdiction bench where I presided over civil as well as felony criminal. I had never done criminal before. And I wound up absolutely loving it. I loved the civil too, but I just was really taken with the criminal and loved it, loved all the criminal law cases. I spent the vast majority of my time with criminal law cases. And then from there, there was an opening on the Court of Criminal Appeals. And as you've probably learned in law school at this point, is that we have a split Supreme Court in Texas. We're actually one of only 2 states that has a split Supreme Court. Oklahoma is the other state. So we have the Texas Supreme Court, which is our civil Supreme Court. And then we have the Court of Criminal Appeals, which is our criminal Supreme Court. So I decided to run for that. And that's statewide, 254 counties in the state of Texas. So it's a huge undertaking. And I was blessed to run and win. I had two opponents in the primary and one without a runoff that time. So that was a great thing. And then went on to a general election where I won there. And I'm now about 3 years into my 6-year term on that court, and I absolutely love it. Definitely a change of pace, different environment, being on the appellate side versus the litigation side, but I'm absolutely loving it and really blessed to do what I do. Now, I know that there was, you're getting some ethics credit here. So I definitely want to talk a little bit about some ethics issues, because I think you wind up facing them perhaps more so when you run for office than when you're appointed. Because when you run for office, I mentioned you have to take your case directly to the voters. And the way you get elected is relationships with the voters. And in this day and age, the way you do that is social media. As a former Texas Supreme Court Justice Don Willett said, and he's now on the Fifth Circuit, but as he once said, and I'm paraphrasing, it's basically judicial malpractice not to be on social media when you're an elected judge. And that's true, because otherwise you can't effectively get to the voters. But there's a lot of perils and pitfalls with social media and judicial candidates. And we have a lot of, we have the Code of Judicial Conduct we have to follow. There's various other ethics rules and campaign finance rules and statutes that we need to be aware of. So if you decide to run, you need to know all of those things inside and out. And even when you know them inside and out, you can still wind up finding yourself in hot water, as I did, because I fully prepared. I knew the rules inside and out. I wanted to make sure that I never went afoul of them. And I was very careful about it. But even being careful, I had a case where a complaint was made to the Judicial Conduct Commission, and they investigated. I had to respond. I had to go to a hearing there, and they voted to actually reprimand me, saying that I had violated the canons of the Code of Judicial Conduct. I knew I had not, because I knew precisely what I couldn't do, and I was very certain that I was correct. And so I decided to fight the reprimand, and I ultimately won. But it took a lot of time, money, and effort in doing so. And it was very stressful. I had to hire my own lawyers. I had to go through a trial de novo where there was a special court of review, which were 3 appellate judges who are justices who were appointed by the Chief Justice of the Texas Supreme Court to sit in judgment over my case, preside over my case. I had to be deposed. I had to hire experts. And then I had to testify at trial. So I had to go through a lot, and was ultimately exonerated. As I mentioned, they found that I had not violated any code provisions, but having to go through that was an awful experience. So my word of warning is that if you run, you need to do social media, but do so very, very carefully, and always err on the side of caution. If you have any question in your mind, you need to just stay away and just try to keep things as, I guess, vanilla as you can, plain as you can, so that you don't run afoul, or, and you still could, even if you're doing the right thing, but you just have to be very, very careful of those things. So that's my ethics talk to you for this presentation. But again, I want to reiterate that the internships and the clerkships are so valuable, and you can make your own destiny, if you will. If this is something you want to pursue, go and talk to, you're welcome to come talk to me one-on-one. I'm sure the other judges would love to talk to you. my door is always open. I always encourage people to go talk to judges that they like and admire and feel that they could learn from. Do the internships and the clerkships, talk to those judges about it, and you can figure out what sort of plan of action. It may be a years-long plan. It may be a more immediate plan, but lay out your plan and don't give up, because there'll be times when maybe you lose an election, or like Judge Brown was saying, he didn't get the initial appointment. So you just keep trying and pursue your dream and don't give up on it.
Thank you, Judge Slaughter. That was great. You're fierce. The whole panel's fierce, but you are fierce. And thank you for sharing about social media. I want to point out that Judge Brown also was on social media before he became a federal district court judge. We have to be careful. You're quite, I guess, experienced politician in terms of running for office. I know, but that's really, the relationship is not just with important people, but also with the voters, which is very, very significant. And I think, the fact that you talked about what students and others could do while they're in school is all significant, that they can always make sure that they are positioned to be ready to be called whenever they need to be called. So I want to ask all the judges to come back. I'll put the videos on. I have some questions, and I asked the audience members also. We have one question from the audience, question. If you have any questions for the judges, please put them in the Q&A. So waiting for Judge Brown. So in terms of questions, one thing I'd like to ask you all is, you've all really done a really great job of explaining how you got there and the accomplishments. And really, as I mentioned, a lot of it's about relationships and how you treat other people. But now that you've been there and you've been judge for a while, what do you think is your most significant accomplishment as judge, or has been as judge?
I'll go.
Okay.
For me, it is the opportunity to be in the community and be seen in the community. Some of my colleagues say to me, we're federal judges, you don't have to speak that much anymore, right? We don't have to be out there. But I go back to the comment that was made by Reverend Lawson, is that it would be good for people to see me in the community. People want to feel that there are people there. We all are looking at the same law books and making up decisions from the same sets of cases and case law and statutes. But I think that when people see that everybody has an opportunity to have a seat at the table, that it instills a sense of confidence in the judiciary. And I think that it is important for me to be out in the community, speaking to students and community members and letting them see that I am where I am, to help with instilling a sense of confidence in the judiciary.
And I'll answer that question. And I'll answer that question in two ways. They're kind of what I'm most proud of as a judge, and what I have found to be most rewarding as a judge. And what I'm most proud of is really kind of basic. I strive and pride myself in feeling like I give people regularly a fair day in court. I'm thrilled to be back on the trial bench where I'm exposed to the public again, where I can work hard to make sure that folks who try cases in the federal courts feel like they've been heard, feel like they have gotten a fair shake from the court, and I work very hard on my bedside manner, on making sure folks have had a fair experience in the courts. What I have found most rewarding is, and I had just happened upon it. It's another one of those things. When I was on the Court of Appeals, when I was on the 14th Court of Appeals, I volunteered weekly on a drug court there in Harris County, and so that's a program where nonviolent felony offenders who are addicted to drugs get put into a special kind of deferred adjudication probation where they're in treatment and they're going and seeing their probation officer on a regular basis, and they're coming in at the beginning weekly to see a judge. And I was one of those judges, and just getting to see healing happen in the courthouse instead of just heartbreak was really awesome. And I will never forget those days that I spent volunteering as a drug court judge.
Judge Lane or Judge Slaughter?
For me, I inherited a bench that was smoothly run. As I said earlier, it was one that had been occupied by Judge Pittman for 8 years. So it wasn't like I came in and solved problems on this bench or in this courthouse. I really didn't. But I do think one of the reasons, and I've kind of heard this through the grapevine, that I was selected is I had an appreciation for trial work. And so I think that if there's one thing that I add to the mix here is a real empathy for the stress that civil and criminal litigators are under. And if you have a real viable active practice, you are under stress. And that manifests itself for me in understanding their plight sometimes. If lawyers need more time, I'm going to give it to them. I'm not in that big a hurry. But having said all of that, one of my favorite things about this job, oddly enough, is the civil work. The criminal stuff is we have duty obligations as magistrate judges, and it's entertaining. And I see it's old school week for me because I see a lot of old friends during the week. But what I really have come to enjoy is the civil work. And this is going to sound crazy. I don't even mind the discovery disputes. Now, I won't lie to you. There's some that are rather petty, and I can deal with those. But for the most part, I love a principled battle over an important issue. I mean, as a magistrate judge, I need to take some job satisfaction from those pitched fights on whether it's discovery matters or other things that are pretrial, because the district Judges Gilmore and Brown, they're the ones that try those cases for the most part. And so I guess just to sum up, I guess the thing that I add is empathy for the litigator and a real finding it very pleasurable to deal with the civil work.
Great. Judge Slaughter.
Yes, I would say, unlike Judge Lane, I did inherit a problematic docket. It was the largest backlog in Galveston County. And I was able to turn that around quickly and turn it into the lowest backlog and the most efficient district court in Galveston County. I was very proud of that. But what really, like Judge Brown was talking about, what really kind of got me each day as a trial judge was being able to provide justice for victims in cases, whether it be civil or criminal, but then also help turn the lives around of defendants who were struggling and were involved in the criminal justice system, but wanted to change. And being able to learn enough about them and our criminal justice system to know what tools I could use to help them. And I had many cases where I was able to implement the right course of action to really change their lives and see them blossom into productive, happy members of the community. And that was really, truly rewarding to have that direct experience with them. And regarding drug court, I do remember one case where I actually had to fight the district attorney to get a person into drug court who the DA's office did not want in drug court, but I knew that's where she needed to be, and that was what was going to help her. So I actually bypassed our DA, went directly to the drug court judge, and was able to get her in, and she turned things around and came back after her graduation just in tears of joy and thanked me, because that's exactly what she needed to change her life around and to get her kids back. And to this day, she's doing great because I still keep tabs on her, and that really made me feel good. In my current role, it's a bit different. Being on a court of last resort and having to not have that interaction, personal interaction. But what I take great satisfaction in is being able to try to ensure justice, whatever that may be, whether it may be for a defendant whose constitutional rights were violated, or whether it be a victim when we affirm a case to provide some finality for that victim or the victim's family, and then also to provide guidance for the lower courts and to have an impact on Texas jurisprudence. So all of those things just make my job very meaningful, and I'm very, very happy doing what I do because of those things.
That's great. We've gotten a few questions from the audience, so let me ask some of them. So one is anonymous about, I guess, Judge Gilmore and Judge Slaughter, about being a woman of color or African-American woman or Latinx woman. And do you see there's any issues that you might face that might be different than other judges may face or have faced? This question.
Judge Gilmore, I'll leave it to you to start off, because you have the length of experience as a woman judge and a judge of color, that I don't have as long on the bench as you do.
Okay, you won't believe what I was doing, Dean Baines. I was actually answering one of the questions in the Q&A, and so you caught me off guard.
You were multitasking.
I was literally typing an answer in the Q&A just as you were saying. So the question generally is, did I face issues as a woman of color, as a judge? I mean, I think that honestly, I think that there's more pushback against you based on your sex than there is on your race. I think that it is hard for female judges, and I think that it is important that you assert yourself early and often, and make sure that people understand that it's your courtroom and that people shouldn't try to take over your courtroom from you. I mean, I'm in trial right now, and I had to deal with that issue today with some lawyers that were appearing before me. And I thought I said, this is my courtroom, right? I said, even if it's only for 50 more days, it's still mine right now. But I think that you have to just make it known that that you're the final word there, and I think that you have to employ. I said to some lawyers once that I sometimes have to employ the don't talk rule from Parenting 1-2-3, which does not require you to argue back with somebody every time they want to try to have the last word. Sometimes you let them have the last word and then you just stop talking, because Parenting 1-2-3 says do not argue with small children, and I've added, or people who act like small children.
Yeah, I would second what Judge Gilmore has said. I think it's really more I've gotten over the years more challenges being a woman than being of Hispanic descent. So, it's really, especially I was 38 when I took the bench, and so in being a younger woman, it was, I think, especially, I'm sure Judge Gilmore experienced this too, when she first took the bench as well, is that, you have a level of, a patronization, if you will, that comes into play, with some of the more experienced attorneys who come in and talk down to you a bit. And then others who try to either trick you or push your buttons or challenge you. So you have a lot more of that. So you do have to be firm. And having had the experience that I did with federal judges and the formality and decorum of federal court, I employed that in my courtroom in Galveston, because I felt like that could give me a good command of the courtroom, and it sort of showed this is a place of respect. I will treat you with respect, and I expect you to do the same for me, not me personally, but the role I hold. So you don't have to like me, but you have to respect the role that I hold here and treat me as a judge with the respect that role deserves. And so I kind of took that position, and I had to be very strict, but I tried to do so in a very respectful way. So it was a lot of excuse me, counselor, will you please stand when you address the court? So there was, things like that, or, just asking them to do different things and having to adopt a sterner tone from time to time if I needed to, use the mom voice maybe, but do those sorts of things. But I always tried to do so with a level of respect, but formality to show that I need you to be respectful of where you are.
There was another question about politics and appointments, especially, and you've sort of all alluded to it, how politics, plays a role. It was Judge Slaughter said in actual elections, and Judge Brown when he's on the state courts elections, but even in the federal bench, is sort of politics plays a role. And so one of the questions was, well, how does that work with appointments, especially, I think Judge Brown alluded to it, what happens if the president's one party and the senators are a different party? How does that play out in appointments for judges in terms of the politics behind it? What maybe the way to describe it, not to put you on the spot, but let me put it this way. How should a person who's interested, who might be in the opposite party, so let's say the president's Biden, you have 2 Republican senators, and you have somebody who's wants to be on the court, but how does he or she get on the court if they're the wrong party at the wrong time or whatnot? It's kind of
you don't. If you're in the wrong party, the president is not going to appoint somebody from the opposite party. Let's just call politics what it is. It's politics at the end of the day. If it's a Democratic president, they're going to appoint a Democratic nominee, and vice versa. If there's a Democratic president and only Republican senators, then the Democratic Congress people from that state have a lot bigger role in terms of putting the name up of the person that they would like to be nominated to the seat by the president. And then the Republican senators have sort of, it used to be sort of veto authority. It's not really so much anymore, but they can put in a blue slip and say, I don't really like that person, kind of thing. But it's really going to be the Democratic congressman when there's a Democratic president. And if you're a Republican and you've been running as a Republican or campaigning as a Republican or supporting Republican candidates, a Democratic president is not appointing you. I mean, it's still political at the end of the day. I don't know, Jeff, what do you think?
Well, I think that's largely the case. I know that to the extent that the blue slip tradition is still around, that's the way. For instance, Cornyn and Cruz can use the blue slip to. It's not quite a veto, but it's respected by their fellow senators, and so it's harder to get somebody. It's harder for a president to get somebody through when the local senators won't sign off on it. Mm-hmm. And so I'll tell you some of the folks who are compromise picks who are on the bench here in Houston now are Al Bennett and George Hanks were both appointed by President Obama. George had been a Republican Court of Appeals judge, and then he was a federal magistrate judge before he became a district judge. But Cornyn and Cruz had to sign off on those 2 guys before they could get through. And so there have been some good compromise picks, but it's a much harder path to go. It's difficult.
Any thoughts?
You still have to have those relationships. You still, yeah. And somebody, I answered a question in the chat. Somebody said, what if you're a different party, than the other people? I mean, to me, you have to have friends on both sides of the aisle. If all your friends are Democrats or all your friends are Republican, you're not going to be a federal judge. I mean, you're just not, period. You have to know people and have relationships with people on both sides of the aisle, because just like Judge Brown said, if the senators, they may not know you, but they know somebody who knows you. And so they are going to be asking around about you, and they're going to be asking whether or not you're a good person and a person that they should support or that they should ding. So they don't necessarily have to know you personally, but if you don't have any friends that might be in their sphere that they can go to and ask questions about you, then you're not going to get it.
Al Bennett was a Democrat elected judge, and he built up such respect on the bench that that Cornyn and Cruz's committee signed off on him, and Cornyn and Cruz signed off on him because of the respect that he built in the legal community. And same with George Hanks.
Right.
The Obama administration signed off on George. He was a Republican. I think he also went to law school with the Obamas, so that helps. But you've got to build up a good reputation for yourself, and that can overcome things sometimes.
Right. Right. And, you know, for me, I got recommended by Senator Krueger, but he lost the election, the special election. He was appointed and he lost, and Kay Bailey Hutchinson became the senator. So when it came time for me to be nominated, the senator that had recommended me was not even the senator anymore. But I had a relationship with Kay Bailey Hutchinson because she was treasurer of the state of Texas when I was chair of the Texas Department of Commerce. So whenever I needed to get a tax break for entities that I was trying to bring to the state of Texas, Kay Bailey Hutchinson was who I would go to. So we had a long-standing relationship that went back to our days when both of us were involved in state politics. So when she became the U.S. senator, she came and sat with me at my Senate confirmation hearing. Now, I'm not sure that would happen today, but she was, you know, when you have a Democratic nominee and a Republican senator sitting next to you at your Senate confirmation hearing, well, who's going to say anything to you at that point in time? And so, but that was based on that relationship. We'd worked for years when I was at Commerce, working on issues of helping the state of Texas and helping getting people to the state of Texas, and her helping me with all kinds of tax abatements and things. So, I mean, those are relationships that's not something that you could have planned out in advance, that you could have thought, maybe one day I'll get nominated to the federal bench. It would be important for me to have this relationship. It just has to be about you being out in the community and building relationships.
Yeah, and having good relationship with everyone. That's really, I think that's the message that we're hearing here. And what about Judge Lane? Does politics play a role in being appointed magistrate, since the judges are the ones that decide this? But
you know, every courthouse, and by that I mean every division within a district's courthouse, is a little different. So I can't speak to the rest of the country, but in this courthouse, it really doesn't, because I'm in Austin and I was a federal prosecutor. I was subject to the Hatch Act, which severely limits your ability to be involved in politics. And I was always so thankful for that. First of all, I'm a cheapskate. So that meant that when everybody was asking me to give money, I was like, oh, the Hatch Act, I'd love to give you money, but I can't. So I spent an entire legal career staying completely out of politics as much as I possibly could. And although both of the district judges at the time that appointed me, both were Republican appointed judges. When I was renewed, one was Republican, one was Democrat. And my sense is, once these district judges get to the bench, as it relates to a magistrate judge, they want somebody who's going to work hard. They want somebody who's going to get the job done, who's going to hire a legal staff that is proficient and does good work and doesn't embarrass them. And so it's a real simple test. And so luckily I was able to stay out of politics. It really doesn't matter in the Austin Division Courthouse, but I can see it mattering in a courthouse where perhaps there's one district judge, and that district judge has strong feelings one way or the other, and they're going to be working closely together, and maybe politics in that instance would be important, but not here.
thank you. But this relates to the other, related question, and then I want to ask a question about clerkships. But there's been a lot of polarization in our society, and Chief Justice Roberts had to say, there's no Obama judges, there's no Trump judges, is what he said, right? In response to a comment. And how do we, that's sort of, the media is also, every time now the media often, anytime there's a case before a judge, they'll say, oh, this judge was appointed by X, Y, and Z, or whatever. What do you see as, how do we get out of this where, the judges are seen as independent, and especially federal judges, and removed from politics? What would you say to someone who's thinking of becoming a judge, and this sort of now concern, that people are become overly politicized because of who appointed them?
Well, I don't know how we overcome that, because it's really it's generated so much by the media that, it's so pervasive everywhere. I don't know that you really get around it other than just do what you need to do as a judge and try to tune out the noise. And I think it really comes down to, as far as whether someone's a Trump judge or an Obama judge. I mean, it really, even judges within the same party, on the court where I sit, there's 9 of us, and we're all Republicans, and, all elected statewide, and yet we don't agree on everything. Each of us approaches a case differently. The exact same case, we can all approach it very differently, and it's informed by our judicial philosophy and our experiences in life and our backgrounds, and all of that impacts it. But at the end of the day, we are trying to give a full effect to the law as it's written, and try to abide by that. But the approach we take can be very different, and we can have a disagreement. As one of my colleagues loves to say, reasonable minds can differ. And that's very true. We can all be the same party and still have very different thoughts on the exact same case. So really I think as a judge, you just have to try to tune out the noise, abide by your own, personal conviction and integrity and judicial philosophy, and do what you need to do.
Thank you. That's great. Good answer. Last question, because we are running out of time, unless anyone wants to answer that, but we'll talk. I think we have students on the call. And so what are you guys looking for clerkships? What are you judges? What would you tell students about the possibility of clerking for you? So Judge Gilmore, I guess you maybe you don't need to
I'm
answer
on the
that.
way out. I'm on the way out. I'm not looking for any more clerks, but when I was looking for clerks, I had a little checklist, a little check sheet of things that I looked for. People who had judicial experience, meaning that they'd done interns for other judges during their law school career, people who had law firm experience, people who'd been on law review, people who had done public service work, and then of course grades and writing. You have to write well. I mean, just period. You just have to have a good writing sample. If I see one single typo in a writing sample that somebody sends me, it literally goes in the garbage can. Because if you don't think enough to correct a writing sample that you're sending me for consideration for a position where your job is writing, then I can't help you on that. But if all you have is good grades and a writing sample, you're not getting a job with me. Because to me, you have to have done some public service work. You have to have been out in the community. You should have worked at a law firm. You should have possibly, hopefully clerked or interned for a judge before that. I'd like to see that you've been out there trying to help somebody besides just yourself. Now, that's just me. That's not important to everybody. For some people, all they want to see is grades and a good writing sample. So it depends on who it is that you're applying to. And I think that you need to try to, ferret out what you think that judge's goals and desires are with respect to the people that they are potentially hiring.
Any other thoughts? So those who are hiring.
Well, I think those are all good tips. I would work very hard on your writing. Judge Gilmore is right. And the only way to get better at your writing is to work at it, rewrite, edit, rewrite. And it doesn't hurt to go to the University of Houston. I like to hire from the University of Houston Law Center. So that helps. And I know Judge Gilmore does too. So, and Judge Hittner, he hires a ton of U of H folks, and Judge Miller. So apply. That's part of it. You can't get a clerkship if you don't apply. So
Perseverance. Judge Lane and then Judge Slaughter.
Well, I don't think I can add a whole lot to that. For me, it is very much about being a good writer. To me, writing sometimes is a little like speed in athletics. It's hard to, you either know how to do it or you don't. And so I've got to have strong writers. I'm also looking for somebody who's interesting that I want to work with. And you can be interesting in a myriad of different ways. And all of my clerks have been different, but I've been very fortunate to have people that are smarter than I am and write better than I do working with me. And so.
So what do you mean by interesting? I have to follow up with that.
Well, it could be, Judge Gilmore alluded to, public service,
Mhm.
a passion for that. There are other people that have a passion for, call it a hobby or something interesting that they do. In other words, they do something besides study a lot.
Mhm.
You got to have the grades and you got to be able to write, but we can find a lot of people like that. You've got to find somebody who's interesting. It's a kind of a catch-all phrase I use to cover anybody who's got a passion.
Mhm. Great, thank you, Judge Slaughter. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, Sandra Day O'Connor, to Judge Lane's point, Sandra Day O'Connor used to like to play doubles tennis. And so she needed law clerks who knew how to play tennis. So I mean, if you played tennis, that was a plus. And if you didn't, well, then that was a ding.
I have to agree with Judge Lane. I always check out the hobbies section of a resume. I do like to find people who are interesting. And when I was applying for internships and for law firm jobs, one of my favorite things, which seemed to always get me an interview, was to put on my resume I was Sandra Bullock's photo double in the movie Hope Floats. And so they all wanted to meet me to see how closely I looked like Sandra Bullock. So it worked.
You are.
There's some resemblance, yes.
I looked so much more like her when I was younger, but yeah, that was a fun hook to get me in the door. But anyway, I would agree that grades are important. For me, more important than grades are definitely the writing and critical thinking, analysis, critical thinking, being able to, break down a statute or a case. And so I really focus a lot on the writing samples and how I do. And letters of recommendation can make a huge difference. I wound up having an applicant, and we ultimately didn't hire him, but he made my short list because of his letters of recommendations. And we interviewed him. We only interviewed 3 candidates. We interviewed him as one of the 3 because he had such really glowing letters of recommendation that were very specific, talked about specific things, that why they thought he would be good, and gave examples of what he had done, for them and in their classes and things. So that made a real impression on me in his case. I also like to see people who have had work experience outside of the legal profession. I worked for 3 years in between undergrad and law school, and I think it better prepared me for law school and a legal career, having been in a professional setting before I went to law school. And so I like to look for that in applicants as well. And that's a huge leg up for me. It's not it's not a deal breaker if they don't, but it's definitely a leg up.
That's great. I mean, the thing I would like to highlight is sort of the recommendations. Recommendations really can be very instrumental. And it's important for any student who wants a recommendation to really talk to the professor or the employer that they work for, maybe give them the resume, maybe give them a writing sample, give them a personal statement so that they have more to go on. I mean, having a recommendation says, oh, he got the highest or she got the highest grade in my class, and that's all they says, doesn't really say anything more about the person than, if the professor or the employer really can say and attest to the person's character and hard work and ingenuity and creativity. That really matters a great deal more.
And also, Dean Baines, there are many law professors who have relationships with judges, and they feed their students, their best students, to judges. So I've over the years had law professors at some institutions who would call me specifically with a student that they had in mind that they thought would be a good fit. So if you have professors that have relationships with judges, that is a real good entree as well.
Definitely. Well, we're at a little over time, but it's been great. It's been a great conversation. Many thanks to our judges. So thanks, Judge Gilmore, Judge Brown, Judge Lane, Judge Slaughter. It's been an invigorating and exciting conversation, but also very informative to our audience. We want to make sure the judiciary is open to all, and I think each of you have provided a lot of information for our audience to follow your path and become judges just like you. We admire you and we appreciate your service to our state and our country. Many, many thanks for all that you do for us. Thank you. Have a good evening.